I like crafting badges on Steam for games I like, and sometime recently I was crafting a badge for Milk too. Sometimes when I craft badges, I get coupons for games, and sometimes those games aren't doing so hot. In fact, I'd say most of the time I run into a coupon, it's for a game that isn't doing that great. So anyways, that's how I met Hallow's Land. Hallow's Land was developed and self-published by Relax Minimalism. This game was originally released on December 23rd, 2014 as an early access game, but Steam also decided to tell me that it exited early access that very same day. The game sits at 72 total reviews, with 30 of those reviews being positive and 42 of them being negative, leaving it with an acceptance rate of about 42%. This game normally costs $3, and as far as playtime goes, it has probably a few minutes worth of new and engaging content, even though I played it myself for like 3 hours, which I'll talk a little bit about later. In short, because there isn't a whole lot to this game, you're floating through space on a small plot of snow with some trees and the snowman equivalent of Wilson. There's a singular fire to set the mood, and depending on how the game feels that day, fire-imbued skeletons in the quantity of infinite, or 4, spawn to threaten your well-being, if you can even call it that. Armed only with snowballs that are weakly projected as if they were fired out of whatever is weaker than a water pistol, you live out your hellscape with no other goal other than to protect your neck until you decide that you've had enough. The game also features Steam trading cards, which is nice, and is probably why there's 185 people playing it right now. One of them is misspelled into skeleton. Anyhow, that's about all we need for the foundation, so let's move on to what I liked. The game has some quirky faults, meaning that some of its weaknesses can be turned into positives in a generous state of mind. If the spawner isn't broken, you can spawn a seemingly infinite amount of enemies, which is how I spent well over an hour in this game. If you open the pause menu by pressing escape, you can still look around and cast snowballs that'll be thrown after you unpause. You can scale pretty much a completely vertical hill by holding down the jump button, which eventually will lead you to falling off the small plot of land and you'll fall into space forever. It does make grinding time out for those cards easier, but you can also just leave the game open on the title menu to the same effect. That's about it, so let's move on to what I liked a little less. Skipping over the quirky faults and ignoring the most obvious that the game is far from being complete, all of my ungoodnings are small, which for a game that has the playtime that's equivalent to how long a Steam client update takes, is actually pretty large in comparison. To start, the physics in the game are wonky. Thinking that I could escape a skeletal horde by scaling a vertical hill, I found that they essentially just float up to get you. Skeletons also spawn on top of each other, which sends them soaring above for a few moments. As I mentioned earlier, the snowball throw is kind of like what you'd expect from a pitcher in a softball league for toddlers. Snowballs also explode in mid-air if they don't collide with anything in time, so they have a hard expiration. Also, not entirely physics related, but you have no death animation when a skeleton touches you. The game just restarts with you standing next to the bonfire, further enforcing the idea that Hallow's Land is just another name for purgatory. Speaking of, the skeletons are a completely threatless enemy. They move much slower than you at your sprinting speed and pose no danger if hundreds of them aren't surrounding you. As I said earlier, they stop following you if you put enough distance between you and them, so it's hard to try and shepherd all of them if you're trying to do something that at least looks fun. It seems that if you manage to kill all of the skeletons before another one spawns, the spawner breaks and fails to spawn new enemies. They also do this strange flicker as they run, which is a little distracting. Moving on to sound, I thought the title screen song was nice at first, but then when I loaded the game I realized I'm listening to the same song, and it only plays for about 12 minutes or so, which makes sense, even the developer didn't think that anybody would play this game for 12 minutes straight. After that, the game just remains mostly silent aside from crackling sounds of the fire, which plays no matter how close or far you are from the bonfire or the fire-imbued skeletons. Finally, while I don't think it's a bad thing, the death sound of the skeletons is pretty funny as it's just someone puffing a burst of air into the microphone. Lastly, the UI is pretty much non-existent. The title menu only has a start and exit button. The exit button works fine, but I had to press the start button several times in order to actually start the game. Then the only other UI element, the pause screen, has no exit button. The only way to get out is to force close the game, turn off your computer, or pour your favorite carbonated beverage into your machine, whichever method seems more exhilarating to you. Anyway, the game isn't entirely unenjoyable, but it's hard to imagine that what we have now was this game's original intended development goal. If you're wondering how I managed to gather up 3 hours worth of time on this game, I let the game spawn a good amount of skeletons while I did other things for about 2.5 hours total, with the intent to see if I could defeat them all. I couldn't. It was too hard. Alright, I think that's enough, so let's move on to the recap. To highlight this game's strengths, it has some quirky faults that turn into some acceptable positives. To consider this game's weaknesses, its physics aren't grounded, the enemies aren't threatening, the sounds aren't sound, and the UI isn't usually intuitive. This is all on top of the game being the farthest thing from being considered complete, as for all intents and purposes, this game isn't a game. It's more like a demo for a game that's someone's introduction to game development project. I can't say I recommend this game, and as a numerical score, I'd give it a 1 out of 10. The last update this game received was in 2016, where the developer had admitted the game wasn't being released that year as originally intended because the development team had a falling out. Someone who appears to be the same developer who posted the 2016 update had posted on the Steam community board in 2021 that a buyer purchased the rights to the game, so the original developer, them, no longer maintains this game. Interestingly enough, you can see older screenshots and see that this game was entirely different back in 2014. Another Steam user had actually posted the old Greenlight page that this game was on, and you can tell that the graphical landscape was very different than the current product we have now. Also, I had this dumb little idea to make an overly dramatic and obvious parody of a cinematic game trailer, but wasn't confident that the idea was interesting, so I did a super short one anyway.
There's a great disturbance on the floating flat planet.
Oh yeah? Well, I'm allergic to storylines.
Storylines? There's no storylines here.
Forgive me, Master. I'll have to go all out. Just this once.
And that was that. Let me know if you liked it, hated it, or what have you, and maybe I'll make more for other games. Alrighty, that's all I've got. Like the video if you liked the video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe if you want to see more of my future content. Feel free to slap that bell's thick ass if you want to receive notifications for future videos.